The evening sky was turning dark, and Jamal hurried down the street, pulling his hoodie tighter as the cold wind brushed against his face. It had been a long day. After school, he had spent hours stacking shelves at the small grocery store where he worked part-time. His feet ached, and his stomach grumbled. He hadn't eaten since lunch. But he didn't complain. He knew his mother was working late again, and he would have to take care of himself. That was nothing new. As he walked, the rain started to drizzle, making the pavement slick. He sighed. Just what he needed. A wet walk home. He was only a few blocks away from the small apartment where he and his mom lived when he heard something strange. It was a faint voice, almost like a cry for help. He stopped, listening closely. The sound was coming from the parking lot of an old shopping center nearby. Jamal hesitated. It was late, and his mom always told him to avoid dark places at night. But something in that voice made his heart race. Someone was in trouble. He turned toward the lot and saw a car with its doors slightly open. A woman was leaning against the side of the car, clutching her stomach. She looked like she was struggling to breathe. Without thinking twice, Jamal ran toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. The woman's face was pale, and sweat was dripping down her forehead despite the cool air. "Please, help, my baby," she whispered, her voice weak. Jamal's eyes widened. She was pregnant, very pregnant. He could tell from the way her hands were wrapped around her belly. Panic filled his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Don't worry, ma'am, I got you," he said quickly, pulling out his phone to call 911. His hands trembled as he dialed. The dispatcher answered, and he explained the situation. "The nearest ambulance is still a few minutes away," the dispatcher said. "Can she wait?" Jamal looked at the woman. She was gasping now, her hands tightening on her stomach, as if she was in great pain. She didn't look like she could wait. His heart pounded. He couldn't just stand there. He had to do something. He ran to the edge of the street and waved at the passing cars, hoping someone would stop. But car after car sped past him, their headlights flashing through the rain. He bit his lip. Why wouldn't anyone stop? Couldn't they see she needed help? Then he saw a rideshare car parked nearby, the driver checking his phone. Jamal rushed to the window and knocked. "Sir, please, this lady needs to get to the hospital now." The driver looked up, surprised, but when he saw the woman, his face turned serious. "Get her in," he said. Jamal carefully helped the woman into the car and jumped in beside her. As they sped toward the hospital, he prayed she and her baby would be okay. The car sped through the wet streets, its tires splashing water as the driver focused on the road. Inside, Jamal sat beside the woman, his heart pounding as he watched her struggle to breathe. Her hands gripped her belly tightly, her face twisted in pain. She looked so weak, as if she was barely holding on. "It's going to be okay, ma'am," Jamal said, trying to sound confident. "We're almost there." The woman gave a small nod but didn't say anything. Her lips trembled, and her eyes fluttered as if she was about to faint. Jamal felt a deep fear inside him. He had never been in a situation like this before, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let anything happen to her or the baby. The driver glanced at them through the mirror. "Hold on, we're almost at the hospital," he said, pressing the gas pedal a little harder. Jamal reached for his phone again and called the hospital's emergency line. "We're bringing a pregnant lady in. She's in pain and can barely breathe," he told them. "Stay calm, young man," a nurse on the other end replied. "We'll have a team ready. Just get her here safely." Jamal clenched his jaw and looked at the woman again. She was sweating a lot now, and her breathing was short and sharp. "Ma'am, you gotta stay awake," he said gently, shaking her arm a little. She blinked slowly and whispered, "Thank you for helping me." Jamal swallowed the lump in his throat. He wasn't doing this for thanks. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. Finally, the bright red emergency sign of the hospital came into view. The driver pulled up fast, stopping right at the entrance. Before Jamal could even move, 2 nurses and a doctor rushed out with a wheelchair. "She's in pain. I think she's about to have the baby," Jamal shouted as he helped them lift her into the wheelchair. "Good job, son," one of the nurses said. "We'll take it from here." Jamal stepped back, his hand shaking as he watched them rush the woman through the hospital doors. He stood there, breathing heavily, rain still falling lightly around him. The driver patted his shoulder. "You did a brave thing, kid," he said before driving off. Jamal looked down at his wet sneakers, feeling strange. He had run here with a woman he didn't even know, and now she was gone into the hospital. Was she okay? Was the baby okay? He didn't even know her name. After a moment of hesitation, he took a deep breath and stepped inside the hospital. The bright lights and smell of medicine hit him instantly. He walked to the front desk. "The lady who just came in, the pregnant one. Is she okay?" he asked the receptionist. The woman at the desk smiled at him. "Are you family?" Jamal hesitated. "Oh, no. I helped her get here." She gave him a kind look. "She's being taken care of. You did something really good, young man." Jamal nodded but didn't move. He didn't feel right leaving without knowing if she was truly safe. He found a seat in the waiting area and sat down. Minutes passed, then an hour. He thought about his mom. She was probably wondering where he was by now. He pulled out his phone and texted her. "I had to help someone. I'm at the hospital. I'm okay." Just as he put his phone away, a deep voice spoke from behind him. "Are you the boy who saved my wife?" Jamal turned around and saw a tall man in a dark suit. His face was serious, but his eyes looked both worried and curious. Jamal blinked. "Wife." The man stepped closer. "I'm her husband." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea that the woman he had just saved was someone important, but he was about to find out. Jamal looked up at the man standing in front of him. He was tall, well-dressed, and had an expensive watch on his wrist. His hair was neatly styled, and his sharp eyes were locked onto Jamal. There was something powerful about the way he carried himself, like someone important. But right now, his face showed something else. Worry. Jamal stood up slowly. "Ah, yes, sir. I helped her," he said, feeling a little nervous. The man took a deep breath and stepped closer. "You saved my wife and my baby," he said. "The doctors told me she wouldn't have made it if she had arrived just a few minutes later." His voice was deep, but there was something in it that sounded grateful. Jamal scratched the back of his head. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. The man's eyebrows raised slightly. "No," he said, "not everyone would stop to help. People passed by and didn't do anything, but you did. You risked your time, your safety, and even ran into the rain to help her." Jamal shrugged. He didn't really know what to say. He had just acted on instinct. He couldn't have walked away and done nothing. The man reached out his hand. "I'm Carter," he said. "My wife's name is Emily. And you are?" Jamal shook his hand, feeling the strong grip. "Jamal." "Jamal," Mr. Carter repeated, nodding. "You're a good kid." Jamal felt a little awkward under the man's serious gaze. He wasn't used to getting this much attention, especially from someone who looked like he had a lot of money. He wasn't sure what to say, so he just asked the one question that had been on his mind the whole time. "Is she okay? And the baby?" Carter sighed, rubbing his face for a moment before nodding. "Yes, the doctors say she's stable now. The baby is okay too." He paused, his voice softer now. "Because of you." Jamal felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been worried this whole time. He didn't need any thanks. Just knowing they were safe was enough. Just then, a nurse came out from the hallway and smiled at them. "Sir, your wife is awake now. You can see her." Carter turned to Jamal. "Come with me." Jamal blinked, surprised. "Me?" "Yes," Carter said firmly. She wants to meet the person who saved her. Jamal hesitated. He wasn't sure if he should go. This was their personal family moment. But something in Carter's expression told him that it wasn't just about formality. This man truly wanted him to come. Taking a deep breath, Jamal nodded. Okay. They followed the nurse down the hallway. Jamal's heart beat fast. He wasn't sure what to expect. When they entered the hospital room, Emily was lying in bed, looking tired but awake. Her face was still pale, but there was warmth in her eyes when she saw Jamal. "Is this him?" she asked in a soft voice. Carter nodded. "This is Jamal." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She reached out a weak hand toward Jamal. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved me. You saved my baby." Jamal hesitated for a second before stepping closer and gently taking her hand. It felt small and fragile in his, but her grip was firm. "I'm just glad you're okay, Mom," he said honestly. She smiled, though tears slipped down her cheeks. "You are a hero." Jamal shook his head. "I'm just a kid who did the right thing." Carter placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "The world needs more kids like you." Jamal looked down, feeling a little overwhelmed. He wasn't used to all this praise, but before he could say anything, Carter's next words took him by surprise. "I want to do something for you, Jamal," he said. "Anything you want. Just name it." Jamal's eyes widened. He hadn't expected this. What could he even ask for? Money? A reward? He wasn't sure. But whatever it was, it had to be something that truly mattered. Jamal had never been in a situation like this before. He had seen stories in movies where rich people rewarded someone for a good deed, but this was real. This man, someone important, someone powerful, was offering him anything. He glanced at Mrs. Carter, who was lying in bed, looking at him with kindness in her eyes. She had just gone through something terrifying, yet she still had the energy to smile at him. Jamal swallowed and looked down at his worn-out sneakers. He could ask for money. His family could really use it. His mom worked so hard, and no matter how much she tried, they were always struggling. Their apartment was small, and sometimes they barely had enough food. Or maybe he could ask for something for himself. A new pair of shoes, a laptop, something cool that other kids at school had. But then a thought came into his mind, one that made his chest feel tight. His mother. She was the strongest person he knew. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep them afloat. And no matter how tired she was, she always put him first. She never asked for anything for herself. If there was anyone who deserved a reward, it was her. Jamal took a deep breath and looked up at Mr. Carter. "Sir," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I don't need money or gifts." Carter raised an eyebrow, looking curious. "Then what do you want, son?" Jamal shifted on his feet. "My mom. She's the hardest working person I know. She takes care of me all by herself. She never complains, but I know life is really hard for her. If you really want to help me." He paused for a second before finishing. "Could you help my mom get a good job?" The room went completely silent. Mr. Carter's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected that. Even Mrs. Carter looked surprised. The nurse standing by the door, who had been listening, let out a small gasp. Jamal felt nervous. Had he asked for the wrong thing? Maybe he should have just taken the money. But then something changed in Mr. Carter's expression. The surprise faded, and something deeper replaced it: respect. "You're telling me," Carter said slowly, "that instead of asking for money or something for yourself, you want a job for your mom?" Jamal nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." Carter let out a small breath and chuckled softly. That's incredible." He turned to his wife. "Can you believe this kid?" Mrs. Carter wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "I believe it," she said warmly, "because he has a good heart." Jamal shifted awkwardly. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just knew what mattered most. Mr. Carter crossed his arms, thinking for a moment. Then he nodded. All right, Jamal. I'll make sure your mom gets a good job, but not just any job. I'll find her something stable, something that pays well. She won't have to struggle anymore. Jamal's chest tightened. Did this really just happen? Was his mom finally going to get a real chance? Carter continued, his voice serious. I want to meet her. I want to know what she does, what she's good at. I promise you, I will find the right place for her. Jamal's eyes stung a little. He wasn't used to kindness like this from strangers. He swallowed hard and nodded. Thank you, sir. This means everything to me. Carter smiled. No, son. Thank you. You reminded me of something important today. Jamal didn't know what he meant by that, but it didn't matter. All he knew was that his mother's life was about to change, and that was the only reward he had ever wanted. Jamal walked home that night with a strange feeling in his chest. It wasn't fear or nervousness. It was something else. Hope. For the first time in a long time, he felt like something good was about to happen. The moment he stepped into their small apartment, he saw his mother sitting at the tiny kitchen table, rubbing her forehead. She looked exhausted. A half-eaten piece of bread and a cup of tea sat in front of her, untouched. Jamal knew this sight too well. His mom worked long hours, barely got enough rest, and still made sure he had everything he needed. She was the strongest person he knew. She looked up when she heard him enter. Relief crossed her face. Jamal, where were you? She asked, standing up quickly. I was so worried. Jamal took a deep breath. Mom, I need to tell you something. But first, sit down. His mother frowned but sat back down. What is it? Jamal pulled out a chair and sat across from her. He told her everything. The pregnant woman, the hospital, how he met her husband, and how Mr. Carter had offered him anything in return. His mother listened silently, her eyes widening with every word. By the time Jamal finished, she was staring at him in disbelief. You could have asked for anything, she whispered. And you asked for me. Jamal looked her straight in the eyes. Of course, Mom. You deserve it more than anyone. Tears filled his mother's eyes. She covered her mouth with her hands, trying to hold back her emotions. Oh, Jamal. Just then, his phone buzzed. He looked down and saw a message from an unknown number. Mr. Carter, tell your mom I'll be calling tomorrow. I'm serious about helping her. Jamal showed the message to his mom. She stared at the screen, still unable to believe it. He's really going to help, she whispered. Jamal nodded. Yes, Mom. He wants to meet you and find you a good job. His mother wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. Jamal, I don't even know what to say. She paused, shaking her head. You could have asked for money, for clothes, for anything. But you thought about me first. Jamal shrugged, feeling a little shy. You always take care of me, Mom. I just wanted to do something for you this time. His mother reached across the table and took his hands. Her grip was warm but trembling. I am so proud of you, she whispered. You have a heart bigger than the world. Jamal smiled softly. I learned from the best. That night, his mother held him a little tighter when she hugged him before bed. And for the first time in a long time, she slept peacefully. The next morning, as Jamal got ready for school, his mother's phone rang. She picked it up with slightly shaky hands. Hello, she answered. Jamal watched as she listened. He saw her expression change, from nervousness to shock, then to something else. Hope. When she hung up, she turned to Jamal, her eyes wide. Jamal, Mr. Carter wants to meet me today. Jamal grinned. I told you he was serious. His mother pressed a hand to her chest. He says he has a job offer already. A real one. A good one. Jamal felt his heart race with excitement. Things were about to change. And for the first time, they weren't just surviving. There was a chance for something better. Jamal watched as his mother nervously adjusted her outfit. She was wearing her best dress, the one she usually saved for special occasions. Even though it was a little old, she still looked beautiful. But Jamal could see the worry in her eyes. "Mom, you look great," he said, trying to encourage her. She sighed and smoothed her hands over her dress again. "Jamal, this is such a big opportunity. What if I mess it up? What if he changes his mind?" Jamal shook his head. "Mom, Mr. Carter is a good man. He wouldn't have offered if he didn't mean it. Just be yourself." She took a deep breath, then nodded. "All right, let's go." They left their small apartment and made their way to the address Mr. Carter had sent. As they got closer, Jamal's mother's eyes widened. "This is where we're going," she whispered. It was a tall, shiny building made of glass, standing proudly in the middle of the city. It looked like the kind of place where important people worked. People in suits walked in and out, talking on phones and looking busy. Jamal grinned. "Yeah, Mom. Pretty cool, right?" His mother swallowed hard. "I've never been in a place like this before." Jamal gently took her hand. "You got this, Mom." They walked inside, and the receptionist greeted them with a polite smile. "You must be Jamal and his mother. Mr. Carter is expecting you." Jamal's mother nodded nervously, and they followed the receptionist to a large office on the top floor. When they entered, Mr. Carter was sitting behind a huge wooden desk, typing something on his laptop. When he saw them, he immediately stood up with a warm smile. "Mrs. Harris, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, reaching out his hand. Jamal's mother shook his hand, her own shaking slightly. "Thank you for meeting with me, sir," she said politely. "Please, call me Carter," he said, gesturing for them to sit. Jamal and his mother sat down, and Mr. Carter leaned forward. "First of all, I want to say that you raised an amazing son," he said. "Jamal didn't ask for money, gifts, or anything for himself. He only wanted something for you. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." Jamal's mother's eyes softened as she glanced at her son. "He's my everything," she said quietly. Mr. Carter nodded. "And I want to help you. I heard from Jamal that you work 2 jobs to support him. That's not easy." She let out a small sigh. "No, sir, it isn't, but I do what I have to." "Well," Mr. Carter said, smiling, "how would you feel about working here?" Jamal's mother blinked in shock. "Here? In this building?" "Yes," Carter said. "I own several businesses, and I have a position available in my company. It's a stable job with a good salary, benefits, and regular hours. No more struggling with 2 jobs. No more sleepless nights. You'd be able to spend more time with Jamal." Tears welled up in her eyes. "But why are you doing this for me?" Mr. Carter smiled. "Because your son reminded me of something important. That kindness deserves to be rewarded." Jamal squeezed his mother's hand as she wiped her tears. With a shaky voice, she whispered, "I would love that job." Mr. Carter grinned. "Then welcome to the team." Jamal couldn't stop smiling. His mother's life was about to change forever. And for the first time, she wouldn't have to struggle alone. Jamal couldn't believe how much had changed in just a few days. His mother had gone from working long hours at 2 tiring jobs to having a position in a big company. It still felt like a dream. The morning of her first day at work, she was up early, looking nervous but excited. She wore a new outfit, one that Mr. Carter had arranged for her. It wasn't anything too fancy, but it was professional and made her look confident. Jamal watched her as she checked her reflection in the mirror. "Mom, you look amazing," he said with a smile. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "I still can't believe this is happening." Jamal walked over and hugged her. "You deserve it, Mom." She held him tightly for a moment before taking a deep breath. "All right, I better go. I don't want to be late on my first day." Jamal nodded. "Go get him." She smiled, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. That entire day, Jamal couldn't stop thinking about how things were changing for them. At school, he paid attention in class, but his mind kept drifting to his mom. Was she okay? Did she like the job? Was everything going well? When he finally got home, he found her sitting on the couch, looking both exhausted and happy. "Mom, how was it?" he asked, dropping his school bag. She looked up at him with teary eyes and smiled. "Jamal, it was amazing." Jamal sat down beside her. "Tell me everything." She laughed softly. "Well, first of all, everyone was so nice. Mr. Carter introduced me to the whole team. They were all welcoming and kind. I have my own desk, Jamal. My own computer." Jamal grinned. "That's awesome." She nodded. "The work is different from what I'm used to, but it's good. And the best part, the pay is more than enough. I don't have to work 2 jobs anymore. I can finally come home and spend time with you." Jamal felt a lump in his throat. That was all he had ever wanted, for his mother to rest, to be happy. She wiped a tear from her eye and took his hands in hers. "This happened because of you, Jamal. Because of your kindness. You changed our lives." Jamal shook his head. "No, Mom. You changed our lives. You worked so hard for so long. You deserve this." She pulled him into a tight hug. "I love you, my boy." "I love you too, Mom." That evening, for the first time in a long time, they had dinner together without worrying about bills, work schedules, or the future. They laughed, talked, and enjoyed the moment. As Jamal lay in bed that night, he stared at the ceiling, feeling something warm in his heart. This wasn't just about getting a job for his mom. It was about proving that kindness mattered, that doing the right thing led to good things. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something even greater. The days that followed felt like a new chapter in Jamal's life. His mother was no longer exhausted all the time, no longer rushing between jobs, and no longer coming home late at night with tired eyes and aching feet. Instead, she came home early, smiling, and full of energy. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, she turned to him and said, "Jamal, I have something to tell you." Jamal looked up, curious. "What is it, Mom?" She took a deep breath. "Mr. Carter gave me more than just a job. He also offered to help with something very special." Jamal frowned. "What do you mean?" His mother reached across the table and took his hands. "He offered to pay for your education at a better school." Jamal's eyes widened. "What? A better school?" She nodded. "A private school. One where you'll have more opportunities, better teachers, and a chance to follow your dreams." Jamal felt his heart race. But that must cost so much. Why would he do that? His mother smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "Because he believes in you." He said that any boy who would use his one chance to help his mother instead of himself deserves every opportunity in the world. Jamal sat back in shock. A new school, a better future. It was something he had never even dared to dream about. "Mom, I don't know what to say." She squeezed his hands. "Say yes, Jamal. Say you'll take this chance and make the most of it." Jamal thought about everything that had happened, how one small act of kindness had changed their lives in ways he never expected. He had only wanted to help his mother, but in the end, his own future had been changed too. He looked at his mother and nodded firmly. "I'll do it, Mom. I'll make you proud." Tears filled her eyes, and she pulled him into a tight hug. "You already have, Jamal. More than you'll ever know." A few days later, Jamal and his mother met Mr. Carter again. This time, it wasn't in his office, but at a beautiful school with large buildings, green fields, and students who looked excited about learning. As they walked through the gates, Jamal felt nervous. "Are you sure I belong here?" he whispered to his mother. Before she could answer, Mr. Carter placed a firm hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Son, you belong anywhere you want to be. Remember that." Jamal looked up at him, feeling a wave of confidence wash over him. "Thank you, sir," he said sincerely, "for everything." Mr. Carter smiled. "No, Jamal. Thank you. You reminded me that true kindness still exists. And sometimes, the people with the least give the most." Jamal smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. As he stood in front of his new school, he realized something important. One moment of kindness had not only changed his mother's life, it had changed his too. And this was just the beginning of his journey.